Roger Nygard, thank you so much for coming down to Hennessey Studios to be here on the show, man.
Happy to be here. Every day I wake up alive, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a good way of living, right? So I see you wear so many different hats, and we're going to kind of dissect them all. Editor, director, author, speaker, producer, and then a documentarian. I didn't even know that was a word.
Yeah, it's not that I get bored. I like to alternate and switch it up because I find that doing one thing, whether it's writing or producing or editing, informs the other discipline, and I get better at the other things by becoming good at whatever it is that I'm doing.
Sure.
So I do get a little bit, I like to challenge myself and pick things that I am maybe not as good at. Although I get tired of doing the same thing over and over. I guess that's the long way of saying that.
Sure. Plus, you have a legacy, right, to leave to this world, right? And you don't want your legacy just to be that single myopic kind of thing, too, right? That's kind of that's why I'm doing this podcast, to be honest with you. My legacy up until this point has been like a digital marketer, and I'm like, I don't know. I think I've got so much more to give to this world. That's
such an important point. When I interviewed Irvin Kershner, who directed Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, I asked him, what is an afterlife? Do you believe in an afterlife? What are your thoughts on the afterlife? And he said, the afterlife is what you leave behind for people.
Yeah.
And so for him, it was his creativity and producing, writing, directing. The tangible effects of your existence are what you leave behind for other generations.
Yeah, yeah. And then you've got sites like Wikipedia to prove it, right? Right, that's my goal. Is that you got to have a Wikipedia page about you before you die, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you probably just didn't live your best life.
It's kind of on you, though. I've noticed to fill it up with stuff too.
It is. Yes, you're right. Yep. And so we're going to be talking about how you've been filling your Wikipedia page up. So let's go back, though, because you don't just kind of start out in Hollywood as, I think Emmy award-winning editor.
Only nominated so far.
Okay, only nominated.
I've had to go and watch other people win 3 times.
Oh, no. That's painful. But hey, who can say they were even nominated? Like that's
No, I'll take it.
Right?
I'll take that.
Yes.
Plus, you get a free dinner at every Emmy thing.
You gotta love that, right? So going way back, right? Where did you grow up?
I grew up I'm a country boy, I guess. I grew up in Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis.
Okay.
The western suburbs, a little area called Orono, which is near Lake Minnetonka. I grew up specifically, for those in Minnesota, on the north arm of Lake Minnetonka.
Okay, got it.
Catching frogs and snakes and fishing, swimming, and canoeing, almost drowning multiple times, blowing things up. There's not much else to do when you live out in the country except try and destroy things. I grew out of that and learned that creating things is a better use of my time. But I grew up out having to sort of learn how to amuse myself.
Okay.
And that turned into making films once I discovered my dad had an 8mm camera. He left it sitting out one day. And if you left something sitting out, I would take it apart. They learned to put things up high or hide them after a while. But I got my hands on it, and these old 8mm cameras were filled with 16mm film that you would shoot one side of it, and then go in a dark room, turn it over, shoot the other side, you send it away to be developed, they'd cut it in half, and then splice it together, and you'd have 8mm a movie to show.
Cool.
So it was for filming family stuff, but I found it and thought, I want to make a movie like I saw on television.
Sure.
So I went and filmed the stop-motion animation of my Linus and Charlie Brown dolls because I was emulating Gumby, which I had seen on television, which was the stop-motion animation show for kids with really weird themes. I mean, if you go online and look up Gumby, like Gumby goes into the oven one day and almost gets cooked. It's so bizarre and weird, but that affected me, and I wanted to do it, emulate it, and that was the beginning of my desire to be a filmmaker, and I've never stopped since then.
Huh.
I mean, it's gotten a little more higher budgets and slightly more extravagant and complex, but not much. It's still the same goofy stuff that I did as a kid, kind of, just cloaked in a little bigger budget.
And so what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a grain buyer for General Mills.
Okay.
General Mills has their corporate headquarters in Minneapolis.
I see.
He would drive to General Mills every morning from our little house on the lake, and my mother was a housewife.
Okay.
And they met in in high school. Actually, at high school, they met in high school at Edison High School in Northeast Minneapolis. Still there, and the primary demographics of Northeast Minneapolis at the time were Polish and Scandinavian.
Okay.
And my dad was Norwegian, my mother was Polish, and it was sort of a Romeo and Juliet thing.
Yeah,
the different tribes, and they met in high school, got married, and my mother only went to college for 2 years, and then became a housewife because that's what you did in those days.
Sure. And were you only a child, or did you have brothers?
Oldest of 4,
Okay.
so I was the bossiest, of course.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do when you're the king. Everyone's smaller than you, and you get your way. You're used to it. I'm probably the dumbest of the 4, I think. and 'cause my brother Steve is a computer expert. Jay is a mechanical engineer. My sister Teresa can read a book, and whatever's in it, she can read the book, and then she just knows how to do it, whatever it is. Like she needed to fix her plumbing once, so she read a book on plumbing.
Really?
And then fixed her plumbing.
See, I wish I had that power. Not me. I'll be looking at YouTube videos, rewinding the video. Like, yeah, that's just me. Yeah. And so, so were you always curious as a kid? Because you seem like a curious kind of guy.
Oh yeah, about everything, and skeptical.
Skeptical too.
My bullshit meter was highly attuned. I realized at an early age, where I started to think that doesn't make any sense. So I would start pushing back or asking questions. That typical thing where kids ask why.
Yeah.
Endlessly. And there's until you're backed into a corner. That was me, because I wanted to know why. Why do we have to go to church? I'm hungry. We would go to church every Sunday, and we didn't eat breakfast first. We go to church first.
Sure.
Because we were always running late, and get 4 kids to church and get dressed up with our suit and tie. And so we have to sit there and starve. And so church for me was, how long until pancakes? How many more minutes until pancakes? And until finally we could go eat. Made no sense to me. I didn't understand the show they were putting on.
Yeah.
Because church is a show.
Exactly. Right.
Good going to church, temple, whatever. The good ones are really entertaining. Sure. Because they've got to keep your interest, with whatever fire and brimstone, whatever story they're telling. If you lose people's, I've learned this as a filmmaker, if you lose people's attention for a second, it's gone.
Sure.
You've got to grab them and hold them until you finish your point, or the moral, you get to the moral, or whatever the point is of what you're trying to express.
Sure.
So really good preachers or ministers or rabbis know how to tell a story.
Sure they do.
And they know how to be funny.
Yeah.
And
got to keep it entertaining.
And then get to the point, which is, okay, now get out your wallets.
Yeah. My church story that I remember, and I wasn't, like, we didn't go to church like every Sunday or anything like that, but we would go occasionally, right? And so I grew up Catholic, I guess if you want to say Catholic, right? And so I remember sitting there, and I was maybe 6 years old, and I'm in the pew with my grandfather, and the priest is up there speaking, right? And I asked my grandpa, I said, "Who's that?" Right? And he says, "Oh, that's Jesus." And I'm like, wow. I'm like, that's really cool, right? And so another week we go there, and I look at my grandpa and I go, "Who's that?" And he goes, "That's Jesus." And I'm like, I'm confused now. I'm like, boy, did Jesus get old, right? It was like a young priest versus a old priest, right? And so that was my view, right? As a kid, we're curious. We don't know. But anyway, that was my story that kind of reminded me of church as a kid.
Well, yeah, in Catholic churches, they put the full-on tortured Jesus sculpture on the cross.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
and
I know.
Put it out there for you to look at this guy suffering.
Yeah.
He's been stabbed. He's wearing a crown of thorns. He's bleeding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a horror show.
I wonder why. Huh.
Like a horror movie, I guess, to scare you.
See? Into
behaving.
I guess so.
We grew up Episcopalian where they eliminated that, and you just would see the cross itself. Mm-hmm. It was I always call it like Catholic light.
I say.
Same prayer books, but not quite as demonic and scary. So all the edges were softened.
Yeah. So you graduate high school. Did you go to college then?
Well, yeah. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker or a director. Any way I could get into the business. So every step I took was to further that goal.
So you kind of knew what you wanted to do early on in life.
The earlier you know, the better your chance at success.
Sure.
Because then you're taking steps in that direction.
Yep.
And so I went to college. I went to the University of Minnesota because that was right near where I lived, and it was convenient. And to me, I didn't even think of I've got to get into Harvard or I've got to get into Northwestern or something.
Yeah.
It was just I've got to take these classes so that I can improve my knowledge. Mm-hmm. Because a good filmmaker needs to know a little bit about everything.
Sure.
Whether it's physics for the special effects, or literature for the writing, or journalism, or what biology, cosmology. I took classes in everything because I was curious again about the universe. I wanted to learn about it, and then focus that ultimately in filmmaking somehow. I didn't know how I was going to do that really, and in hindsight, I've got regrets that I could have focused better and differently if I'd known. But you don't know everything.
You don't know. Yeah.
You got to kind of figure it out as you go along. But at least I knew my goal was to somehow get to Hollywood and seek my fortune or die trying. So I'm still here, haven't died. I'm still making a go of it.
Yeah. So you ended up graduating college, and then what took you to Hollywood?
Almost the day after I graduated, I packed up my brown Celica with whatever I could fit, toasters and spoons and the stuff I would need in an apartment, and drove it over the mountains. That little 4-cylinder car barely made it. I've never tried to drive over a mountain before, and I was like, what's wrong with my car?
No job, probably not a lot of money.
Didn't know anybody,
bank, right? Yeah.
Knew nothing, except I got an apartment at one of these corporate apartments. It was called the Oakwood Apartments.
Yeah, I know that.
Because that was the only place that would take me.
In Toluca Lake, there's one. Yeah.
Yes, that's right up here in Barham. That was where I stayed for my first month. Yep. Because the only way I could get someplace was a hotel or a corporate apartment. You can't book an apartment from another city. They want to meet you and fill out a form. And so once I got here, then I found an apartment. But booked that, which was cheaper than a hotel. And once I got here, I sat down at my desk in my little Oakwood apartment and stuffed envelopes. I sent out 1,000 resumes. Okay. I got a book that listed every single production company in the business. I didn't know anything or anyone.
Email would have been faster.
Yeah, didn't exist. So had to do it by hand. It took me a week, and I wanted to send everyone an individual letter so it didn't look like it was, like I was sending out spam. Yeah. I wanted to sign each one, and so that's why it took so long. And even with that quantity, that shotgun approach, my response was only 1 out of 100 response rate. Okay. So if you only send out 100 resumes, you might get no responses and think, oh, I'm never going to succeed. Sure. Maybe you just didn't send enough because it was all about timing. That's right. The ones that responded were the ones who that day, typically, their production assistant had put in their notice. My resume arrives. Oh, this one just arrived, because otherwise it goes in the trash. Sure. Right? And I got a call. So ultimately, I got 7 phone calls, which led to 3 interviews and 2 job offers. And so I took one where I ended up working for the next 5 years. As a PA? Started as a production assistant, runner, fetching the lunches. Yep. And I was the best lunch fetcher they had ever seen. You're going to excel at whatever you did, right? Yes. Yep. I organized a chart. And when they wanted everyone wanted a salad, made at the salad bar, I made them fill out a little, okay, what do you want? So I knew exactly everyone's likes and favorites, and I delivered it just the way they liked it. And then I got promoted eventually to an assistant. And I didn't plan it that way, but what happened was, when you're there every day, you just have to show up. That's one of the keys to success, is just show up. With a positive attitude. Yes, can do. You're the person that they can count on. You're reliable. You get there before everyone, and you leave after everyone. And when that happens, sometimes an assistant calls in sick. And, okay, well, Roger's here. Put him in the chair. So I would sit in for Larry Bresner, who was a manager producer I worked for, and Buddy Mora. When their assistant was out, I would sit in and answer the phones for them and make their return phone calls and send out packages and just deal with whatever had to be dealt with. And I was overwhelmed because I'd never really done that before, but I just put all my attention on it and did the best I could, and I felt like I was like running in quicksand. After that time, like spending a week in someone else's chair, Buddy Morris Morris said he wanted to hire me for that. He fired his assistant and hired me instead.
Really?
I didn't intend to get that person fired.
No, of course not.
But he looked at the qualitative difference in terms of how it affected his life, because I was so much more organized.
Sure.
And it made a difference in his life. And so then I got promoted and eventually to a talent scout. And my job was to go to comedy clubs and look for stand-up comedians, because they managed comedians.
Okay.
And bring them to their attention. All the while I was working on my own projects, trying to get a film made.
Interesting. Got it. And so you worked with that organization for many
almost
years?
5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it was virtually 5 years. It was one of the greatest jobs I've ever had, because it was like a family there.
It seems like you're learning everything about the behind the scenes of what happens in Hollywood. Right?
You need to mentor somebody who's already doing it, because they can't teach you in film school.
No.
Some of the nuances, like how to say no. There's a way to say no. When people, because when you're an agent or a manager, you get a lot of phone calls for their clients. For your client, we want to book Billy Crystal or Robin Williams or Martin Short or David Letterman or Woody Allen. These were their big clients. Yeah. And most of the time they've got to say no. And there's a way to do it that people go away happier than they arrived, even though you said no, because you put it to them, you said no in a nice way.
Of course.
Which keeps it still, you keep them, you value them and their input, because you want people to keep coming to you with offers.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And where the bad managers I saw were not good at sending people away happy.
I got it. Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it. In life and everything, right? There's a way to communicate, right? Where you don't burn bridges and things.
A manager's job is to say no. That was what I noticed there. They rarely said yes, because they liked Billy Crystal to do one big movie per year. Otherwise, you get overexposed. The clients get overexposed, and you start to, I've seen them in 3 movies. I'm tired of that one. Yeah. As opposed to, how exciting, a Billy Crystal movie. And I know it's going to be good, because you build up a reputation for being a good product. Sure. And they helped them pick quality
and not quality. Yeah, quality and not quantity. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I would have never thought about that, But you kind of led down to the path of editing, right?
Yeah, I came to Hollywood wanting to be a filmmaker. I want to make movies, but I didn't really know what that meant.
And it was you all had visions of behind the camera.
Yeah, calling the shots, being the next big filmmaker. Yeah. And nothing ever goes the way you expect. There's the old Woody Allen joke: if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, because nothing ever goes the way you expect, ever, right? Yeah, but you need to be open to opportunities. Sure. And it turned out I found I had a knack for editing. Okay. And I didn't know that. I had never really pursued editing specifically, or even when I started out, I had other people editing for me. Like on my first feature, I hired an editor. It was this low-budget comedy called High Strung. Okay. That starred a comedian named Steve Odekirk, who later wrote like Patch Adams and Jimmy Neutron. Oh, cool. And Kung Pao, The Fist, I forget what it was called, comedy, lots of comedies. Yeah. And there also had Denise Crosby in it. We cast her, who became my partner in Trekkies later on. And Jim Carrey is in it with a brief cameo, unbilled cameo. And that doing that first film was, I didn't expect that I would be editing it. I just thought I'd be directing it. But I sat in the editing room and I watched my editor, and by week 5, looking over his shoulder, I realized I knew how to do it. So I kind of pushed him out of the way and finished the movie. Wow. And because I thought it's just so much faster if I do it than if I have to put it through him, and then he's got to do it, and we've got to try variation. So ever since then, I've been editing, and people started offering me jobs to edit once they saw the product, and I say yes to opportunity. Sure. Yeah. And so those were the greatest opportunities came from. I've also directed and produced and written, of course. Yeah. But mostly I've been editing because that's where the majority of my job offers come from. Interesting. And so as you are, I guess the connections that you're making, that's really kind of where the
the more exciting stuff kind of happens, right? As you're editing this piece and you're meeting this person, they're introducing that person. That's like Hollywood connections, right? That's where it takes you. Yeah.
It's crucial who you know, because you don't know what knowing that person is going to bring to you. It's often surprising that someone I've worked with a year later, 6 months later, 5 years later, turns up and says, hey, would you like to do this thing with me? When I was working at my job as a runner, as a messenger, I met somebody who was at my same level at Paramount, where our company was located. His name was Luis Estrada, and he was kind of a peon like me, but he was in the accounting department. And we became friends, had lunch, and tried to get films made together, kind of on the side, and never succeeded. And we went our separate ways. And he ended up, as many years later, as an executive at TNT Latin America.
Oh, okay.
So I got a call from him one day. Luis said, hey, I'm now at TNT Latin America, and we need someone who can make promos for us.
Okay.
And I know you've been doing some, you made a film and you've been doing some editing. Do you want to try producing and editing some promos? And I said, yes, because I was at that point $30,000 in debt. Yeah. And so anything sounded good.
Sure.
I spent 2 years writing and producing and editing promos for TNT for things like the Bette Davis movie marathon. So I would have to edit a short encapsulation of her career, and then we would hire a voice talent to replace my voiceovers.
Yep.
But what it taught me was editing commercials and promos when it's got to be fitting into a 15-second slot or a 30-second slot. Every frame counts.
Sure.
So I spent 2 years. It's like shooting layups, like practicing my craft and learning how to edit. And those are all the skills that I took forward into becoming an editor, and which is why when people saw my work as a comedy editor, I think they started to notice that I had a knack for making things funnier by the way I edited. It's because I practiced. I'd gotten in my 10,000 hours or whatever.
Yeah, outliers, right? Yeah. So is that really a thing? Is there a difference between like drama editors and sci-fi editors and comedy editors? That's a thing, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Really?
Comedy
I don't think
editors,
the ordinary person would even know that. Yeah.
A comedy editor gets paid more than a drama editor.
Okay.
Because there are fewer of them that are good. And the reason is that you can tell when something's not funny.
Yeah.
Because you're not laughing. With drama, it's harder to discern, is this dramatic or not? You can slide more and get away with it. And you might be a little looser of an editor and get away with it. But if you're a comedy editor, you've got to be tight, you got to have it right, it's got to be working. Or it shows.
Sure. And now, is the editor usually on set watching this being filmed real time?
Sometimes, but rarely.
Okay.
Most of the time you are in your little room sorting through mountains of footage.
Because I would imagine that like you're like taking in the reactions of like the crew, right? Of what is funny too, right? If you're on set.
Sometimes I have been to the sets and observed, but I found that to be just more of a lark. It's just fun to do. You don't really know what you've got until you look at it on the screen in the editing room. The way something is shot, let's take the tempo, for instance. It's almost always too slow. The director, the way that he directs it, he or she, or the actors, the way they act it, or the way it's written, it's always written or acted or directed too slow.
I see.
And in context, when you juxtapose shots and start building a scene, I always start speeding things up, especially in comedy.
I see.
In drama, you've got to let it breathe more so you can feel the emotion in the silences. But in comedy, there's no time. You need to get from one joke to the next, or you're going to lose them.
I got it.
And you don't know what timing to use until you get there in that room. And so they don't know on set. They have no idea, really, what I do.
I see.
They're kind of oblivious. A lot of actors will watch themselves on screen and go, well, I'm pretty good, having no idea how much work I did behind the scenes to fix their performance and to fix their enunciation and speed things up and drop mistakes or word stumbles or all the ums and you knows and the pauses or I call it word baggage.
Yeah.
I sweep all that away and clean it up so that they seem to flow effortlessly.
Interesting. So when you, like, let's just say Will Ferrell, right? I could imagine that there's the way in which the script is written, but then there's all the improvised, scripts as well, right? Where you're just kind of doing improv. So as the editor, like, are you like looking through multiple different takes and sometimes maybe even using the improv version and not really what's on the script if it's funnier?
Often.
Yeah.
But it depends on the performer. Most actors are not good at improv.
Okay.
It's a specialized talent.
I
but
see.
when you've got Will Ferrell or you've got somebody...
Steve Carell, right?
Steve Carell is great at improv.
Yeah.
Yeah, or Christopher Guest and his entire cast in one of his films are chosen for their improv abilities.
Mm-hmm.
That's a completely different approach than cutting the script together. Like when I was editing Grey's Anatomy, I'm basically just cutting the script cutting the performances into the way it was scripted.
I see.
There's no to little improv on a show like that. They write the scripts, they like what they've written, and they want it shot that way and edited that way. Whereas the exact opposite is Curb Your Enthusiasm, obviously, where it's entirely improvised. Yeah. And so it's on me to figure it out in the editing room, how to build a scene out of every take is different.
Yeah.
And so they rely on me to become a partner in the storytelling.
Got it. That is interesting. And this had led you to write your first book, right? Which is called Cut to the Monkey.
Yes, well, technically it's my second book.
That's your second book, okay.
But my first on the film industry. My first book was about marriage. It's called The Truth About Marriage, and it's a companion book to my documentary about marriage. And I'm not married, so,
Well, we'll talk about your first book second, right?
The second book, Cut to the Monkey, was me, after meeting a lot of editors who I thought, they're doing it wrong. Uh-huh. I wrote, well, here's the way to do it. When I was on Grey's Anatomy, one of the editors came up to me and said, hey, how do you cut comedy? Kind of feeling the same way you're feeling when you're asking me, is there a difference?
Yeah.
Because there are comedic moments on Grey's Anatomy, and that was one reason Krista Vernoff hired me, is because they were going back towards their comedic roots, and they wanted to try to make the show a little funnier like it used to be, because it got really serious for a while, for many seasons. And so the editors who were already there were used to the very dramatic flow.
Sure.
So he asked me for some pointers. And so I wrote a list of 10 or 12 things to do.
This is to the editor of the show at the time?
Yeah, one of the editors. There's 4 editors on Grey's Anatomy. And so I gave him a list. And I just kept going after I wrote him that list. And I thought, I got a lot of ideas about, yes, there's a lot of things you can do to make things funnier and better. And, for example, I told him when he wanted to be funnier, look to the wider shots. Because drama is in the close-up, in the face. But if you want something to be funny, you want to see the body language. If someone's standing awkwardly, there's extra humor to be found in that. And so get away from the close-ups. That's one thing. And also speed it up. Faster comedy is funnier comedy, as opposed to your dramatic scenes where you can slow it down. So I gave him this list and then just kept going, and cut to 2 years later, I'd finished this book finally.
And so the book is it like a micro niche where you're really trying to reach out to editors, Hollywood editors? Is that who the book was really written for?
Primarily, yeah. Okay. It's like a cookbook for editors.
Huh.
Here's how it's done. From what I've learned, and I also interviewed all of the showrunners I was working with for their wisdom. So I infuse it with all of the wisdom from Larry David and Judd Apatow and Sacha Baron Cohen and Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Krista Vernoff, etc. And laid out, this is the way editing, when you're editing a scene, here's how you break a scene down and put it back together again. And here's what to look for and what to get rid of. Follow these rules and your scene will be 15% funnier. And most people don't understand a lot of these things. You find out through trial and error, but I'll get you there faster if you want to read this book. And for example, it's amateur time when I look at somebody on screen is speaking. And if the dialogue is from somebody who's not on screen, like you're on a reaction shot or something other than the person speaking, and if I hear a pause or an or I know that's an amateur, because there's no reason to leave that in if you're not on the person's face. You have total control over the dialogue. So you want to get rid of that word baggage that does nothing. It adds nothing to the story for someone to say, Yeah. So all of the looks and the listens, look. People will start a sentence by saying, look, blah, 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 blah. When they do that, it's like an announcement. They're saying, I'm about to speak, pay attention to me. Well, just say the line. Yeah. You don't need to announce it. So I cut the announcements, cut the word baggage, tighten it up, and it's just funnier and flows better, and it's more interesting to watch.
So when I go to the movie, I don't notice any of this stuff, right?
Well, a good editor's gotten rid of it.
Right.
A bad editor's left it in, and you just come away thinking, that movie was so-so, could have been funnier, but maybe you don't put your finger on
you
why.
You don't realize why. Whereas you, when you're watching a movie, you're cringing in some cases.
Often.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's really fascinating.
It's very self-serving for me to write this book, so it reduces the amount of cringing I have to do on future projects.
I love that. So as far as writing the book, it seems like you're now writing another book, which would be, I guess, your third book.
Third book is about making documentaries.
Okay.
Which is my other skill that I have. My first documentary is called Trekkies, about Star Trek fans, and I fell into that by accident, kind of, because Denise Crosby, who was in my first film, we stayed friends, and one day she said, I'm going to these Star Trek conventions.
Are you a big fan of Star Trek?
No. Okay. I'm a fan. I grew up watching it, just like everything else that was in syndication.
Yeah.
I just loved science fiction. Like the Time Tunnel was on, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Immortal. Star Trek was just another sci-fi series from that time for me. So, but I didn't become one of these people who went to conventions, and I know people who are that way.
Sure.
And that's how I knew when Denise said, someone should make a documentary about this world. And it was like, no one's done that yet? Of course. It's so
did you have
obvious.
any experience doing documentaries at all yet?
No, not at that point. No.
Okay. Huh.
So Denise and I kind of teamed up, and we just rented some movies, some documentaries, and we watched My Brother's Keeper, Hoop Dreams, Crumb, and started trying to absorb the language of documentaries.
Yeah.
And we found a producer at a company called Neo Motion Pictures, Keith Border. His company put up enough money. We pitched it to them. They put up enough money to shoot one weekend at a convention that Denise Crosby was invited to as a guest because she was an actress who was on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we would see what the footage was like, if it was worth continuing. Mm-hmm. So we shot that weekend, and we got interviews with 6 of the 9 original cast members who were there at that convention, which was pretty good. We thought, wow, we did great. We got these 6. But what was really amazing was the fans themselves. The footage was so colorful and so funny that once I had cut together this demo from that first shoot, it was, of course we're going to finish this. We're onto something. You feel it when you've got something.
Of course.
It's like when you're fishing, you cast and you got something on the line. This is a fish, right? We knew we had something there.
Yeah, sure.
So we took it, we kept going until we had a finished product.
And how long did that take?
It was 9 months. It was the
9
fastest documentary. They've taken longer every time for some reason. But that partly because the subject matter was so colorful.
Sure.
We went to another 6 or 7 conventions, and then we had a film.
And then where like, did you sell it? Like,
we started going to film festivals.
Okay.
We started doing screenings. It was hard to get distributors and studios to look at it.
Yeah.
Because there's so many films out there. We couldn't. Paramount seemed like the perfect home for it because they own Star Trek, the franchise, but we couldn't get them to look at it. Couldn't be bothered.
Huh.
Until Denise Crosby was friends with one of the principals at a company called Beacon Entertainment.
Okay.
And she got him to look at the film. And he flipped and said, this is fantastic. And they had a deal at Universal. So he made Universal look at it.
I see.
And they said, oh, yeah, this looks like there's money here.
There goes the whole Hollywood connections again, right? Yep.
And once we had an offer on the table from Universal, suddenly Paramount was, oh, wait a minute, we want to see it now. And then we had a bidding war between the two of them, and they bid the film up. The first offer from Universal was for $250,000, which we were thrilled.
Sure.
Wow. And then what this bidding war got ultimately we sold it for $1.25 million.
Is
Paramount
that right?
that was the final bid where it topped out. And eventually you got to know when to fold and take your cards and take your chips off the table.
Of course.
And it just made sense, and we took that deal. And Paramount had a 20-year license. They didn't buy it; they licensed it, and so it just recently returned to us, and we're re-releasing it this year.
Oh, cool!
On Blu-ray and streaming. And we just did a restoration and rescanned it in 4K, and it's the first time it'll be available again first time it'll be available ever in high definition.
Oh, cool! Congratulations!
A company called Shout Factory picked it up. Because once again, Paramount, they let it go.
I see.
But I get it, because the big studios, they play for home runs. Every time at bat, they want a home run.
Sure.
So a little documentary, we're a bunt.
Yeah.
You know, we got on base, but we're a bunt. And so it's just kind of beneath their radar. It's not what they do. Whereas Shout Factory, they specialize in films like this. And so they were excited to
and that's who you
license the
want,
rights.
because they're going to put more behind it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good home.
Yeah. And so that kind of led you down this new path of, now it seems like you had a passion for creating documentaries, right?
Once, yeah. People have asked me, like, you know, why do you make documentaries, or how did you get started? You do it once. It's like doing heroin. Just try it once. You know, what's the big deal? You do it once and you're hooked.
Sure.
Because making a documentary is so exciting. It's so much fun. It's so different than writing a script and shooting a movie. I've done both. When you write a script, you're always trying to reach what you imagined that script would be in your mind, and falling short and being disappointed. It's never quite what I hoped it would be. But it's good. You know, it turns out good, you know, but because your imagination, you have just high hopes. With a documentary, you don't know where it's going to end up. It's such an unknown journey. And so life is, you're supposed to experience the journey in life anyway. That's where the greatest happiness is to experience the journey, not the arrival. It's a documentary puts you on a journey. And we went on this amazing journey, meeting amazing people, and I had no expectations. I didn't know what to expect, and I was completely blown away at every time we stopped and interviewed people, and in the editing room, working together as a team, and until we finally, you know, arrived somewhere and screened it for an audience and found out our instinct was right. People are they're enjoying what we created.
Yeah.
There's no greater feeling than like, I still get emails sometimes from people who've seen one of my films, and they tell me how it affected them. And it makes you feel, it's like you were saying, you know, it's what you leave behind that matters. If you make something that touches people or changes them in some way or affects them in some way, it's incredible.
It really is.
That's the goal.
Sure. And so the documentary they see here, it was called The Nature of Existence.
Yeah, I took on existentialism as a topic.
Okay.
Which is impossible. How do you make a documentary about existentialism? What is it? What does it even mean? But I've been obsessed, I realized one day, with existentialism since I was a kid.
For those that don't know what that means in English, go ahead.
What is it?
Yeah.
It's asking the question, why do I exist?
Why do I exist?
What is the purpose of life? What is my purpose? And for me, that first experience was when my father died at a young age. I was 13 when my dad died from multiple sclerosis. And that, when someone you know who's close to you dies or has a near-death experience, it forces you to face your own mortality.
Sure.
Which is not what we like doing. We try to shove that under the rug and live in denial as much as we can of the fact that we're not going to be here one day, because it creates anxiety in the brain and depression, that we're transitory. You know, the idea that the self that I feel will not be here someday is hard to deal with. And that creates, and the great existential philosophers have been asking these questions for eons. I'm not the first by any stretch, but why are we here?
Sure.
So I set out to answer that question, which is unanswerable.
Yeah, it's not so subjective, right? Yeah.
But that was the challenge of doing that was what was exciting to me, to take on an impossible task. I didn't know where it would lead. And I took my cameras, went on the road, sought out experts from every major religion around the world, and asked them these questions. Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? Is there an afterlife? What is sin? Is it okay to masturbate? And I took all their answers and juxtaposed them, intercut, and it became hilarious. When you watch people trying to answer the unanswerable, and they all have answers that they're cocksure are absolutely right, but it's diametrically opposed to what someone else is saying.
Yeah.
It's naturally funny to watch them.
It is.
Try to answer these questions. The ones who admitted they don't have the answers were the scientists.
Sure.
And I found them to be the most philosophical. For example, there was a particle physicist I interviewed at Oxford when I asked him, what is the soul? He said, the soul is a type of wishful thinking that resides in the frontal lobe. So succinct.
Yeah.
And to the point in which he's basically saying it's hard to cope with the fact we're going to die someday. It's much easier to know that we're going to go somewhere else.
Sure.
And that's the modification the brain added at some point to deal with the fact we had so much intelligence that it led to a consciousness and a self-awareness and to an understanding of time and the fact that I was here, I didn't used to be here, someday I won't be here. How do I deal with that? Well, one way is to believe in an afterlife.
Sure, sure.
Whether there is one or not, I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm saying the belief in it helps you feel better about it.
Yeah, you brought back a memory. So 2021 was a tough year. Lost two grandfathers and my father, right? And so my first grandfather died around like January of 2021. Yeah, right at like pandemic time of COVID. And so, we fly out, it's snowing, it's New York. And as he's sitting in the casket or laying in the casket, all the family comes in, people are crying, people get up, say words. There's all these photos and there's a video playing photos in the background. And then all I could think about was like, this is how it ends, right? And it kind of inspired me to possibly want to write a book at some point called Glimpse, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have the power, right? You're laying there. Now you don't have the power, right? But now I do, being here, witnessing this, getting a glimpse, I have the power to kind of control the photos and the memories and all of that, right? It kind of gave me an interesting perspective on life from that. So.
It brought you back into the moment.
It did.
That's where happiness lies, is living in the moment.
Yep.
And that's what death gives us a chance to come back to the moment. And then you can start thinking about those how am I going to use my time better?
Sure.
I've been wasting so much time. I've got to make some changes.
Yeah.
There's a moment in my documentary, The Nature of Existence, where I asked a comedian friend of mine, Bobby Gaylor, who's a writer now, about this topic. And he said he had a similar experience to what you had, where he said he was working on a script once about a coroner. So to do research, he went to the morgue. To just kind of get a feeling for the morgue. And he walked into a room, and he walked in Los Angeles, a lot of people die. And so there was 50 dead bodies on tables and spread around the room and in different stages of the process that the coroner goes through in bringing in bodies and sending them out to where they're going.
Sure.
And he was struck by this thought, which is exactly what you said, basically, that these people have lost their agency. They have no more choices to make in life. Their choices are over.
Yeah.
And he started thinking, well, I got to start making choices. I got to call my brother. I got to call my mother. I got to start writing that book I was thinking about.
Yeah.
I got to do this. I got to do that. And it overwhelmed him with, I need to get busy and start using this time I'm wasting.
Yep.
But he had to be reminded, physically, of death again and again. And it's a disservice when our society tries to help us deny that, to live in denial of death, which is generally what happens.
Yeah. But whenever I was a kid, talk about death, and my mom would be like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. Right?
Yeah.
But nobody wants to talk about that.
But we need to. Many cultures do. Like in Mexico, they have the Day of the Dead, where the dead are
that's a big day.
Re-experienced as part of who they are, and you got to remember them.
That's
it's important to remember the dead, because we want to be remembered, right? And so now we know that when we're gone, people will remember us on the Day of the Dead, and it makes us feel better.
Sure.
And it's good to talk about these things. And I found in making documentaries with hard questions, people love talking about these hard questions.
Yeah.
Where they're just waiting for someone who's willing to talk about it.
Sure.
And open up and listen. And I just provide a listening ear. It's what you're doing with your podcast. It's an amazing service that society needs. We need people who listen, who are willing to listen.
Yeah. And capturing a moment in time. And, and the stories that you're sharing now will be listened to by other family members later on, right? Yeah.
Maybe they'll find a nugget of something helpful in there. Maybe they'll learn something. Maybe it'll inspire them to do something.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that's all you can hope for.
That's really it. Yeah, like I've got this like vision, I guess, if you will, that when we die, that you get to meet the person that you were destined to become. And you want to try to line up as much as you can so that when you shake the hand of that person or fist bump or whatever you do, right?
Yeah.
That you are as closely aligned to who you were destined to become.
Yeah, and
right?
if you got off track, what happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You probably forgot to live in the moment and to be grateful.
That's it.
And to thank people and to tell
Take
people.
chances, risk.
Tell people
right?
how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And ask people how they feel.
Sure.
That's the most important thing that we don't do enough of is ask people, hey, how are you feeling?
Sure.
And then listen.
Yeah. Yeah. That is key. So then well, I'm not sure if this one. So I love your documentaries, right? Because you're trying to kind of like answer questions that are almost impossible to answer. Like,
Right.
Why
the harder
are we
the
here?
answer, the better.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there an answer why we're here?
Yes.
There is.
You want to hear the answer?
I do.
I mean, yes. It's what I learned. This is my answer.
Okay.
Everybody has to find their own answer. Why do we exist? What is your purpose?
Yep.
That's up to each and every one of us to decide for ourselves. No one can give you your purpose. Mm-hmm. People try to find people who will give them a purpose.
Yeah.
Go to the priest. What am I supposed to do? Well, you're supposed to do this according to this old ancient text.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's one way to do it. The best way is to find a purpose that's immersed in what it is you love to do. And you said this to me when I walked in here this morning, right? You ideally want to get paid to do something you love to do.
That's right.
Then you can live a happy life and get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, when I got to the end of the process of filming the nature of existence, after I'd asked all these experts about it, my realization was that the universe is vast, right? And it's filled with stars that are being born or dying, exploding stars and coalescing stars. There's star nurseries, and it's filled with creation and destruction. They're opposites. The universe is filled with opposites, matter and antimatter,
Sure.
yin and yang, light and dark, creation and destruction. If you want to be happier in your life, this was what I learned, you can align yourself with either of those poles, creation or destruction, but you'll be happier if you align yourself with creation. What does that mean? That means you behave creatively, not destructively in your life in general.
Sure.
So how do you act creatively? Well, you could sketch. You could make pottery. You could take a dance class. You could write a poem. It doesn't really matter as long as you're expressing yourself in some way, how you're feeling. I mean, an architect expresses how they're feeling through the lines of a house or a building.
Sure.
Writing a business proposal can be done in a very creative way that is successful.
Sure.
Whatever you do, you want to be creative daily for a few minutes every day if you want to increase your happiness. And that's your purpose, to find a way to be creative. Now, for most people, the default is to create a new, younger version of themselves and try to raise it up to be as better than you were. Mm-hmm. If people have babies, and suddenly that becomes the focus of their life for the next 18 years, or however long it takes to kick them out of the basement. So sometimes it's 30 years, but that. Having a baby, I read a statistic somewhere, adds 30 hours of caregiving to your life every week. And so essentially that monopolizes all your time and your focus. Once that is over, once that baby leaves the nest and becomes an adult, now you're back to where you started.
There's a sense of emptiness. Sure.
What do you do now?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're back to asking that same question. What is my point in life?
Yeah.
What is my purpose? And then people at that point take up hobbies.
Yeah.
They take a pottery class or a dancing class and start to realize, oh, this is what I was missing. And part of what was missing in my life was creative expression.
Sure.
There was a study once where in a nursing home, there was 100 people, and they gave everyone a plant. They told 50 of the residents, don't worry about the plant. We'll take care of it. Here's a plant for you, but you have no responsibility. We'll water it and take care of it. The other 50, they said, here's a plant. You need to water it and take care of it. It's your responsibility. The ones who had the responsibility lived longer. Just that little responsibility of caring for a plant, because growing a plant, that's creation. Like planting a garden.
Yeah.
That if you want to have a purpose in life, plant a garden, and you will find a happiness you didn't know was within you, because you're watching life come forth from something you did.
Wow.
And it's programmed into who we are to want to create.
That is powerful.
That was my lesson. What I came and I create by making documentaries, by editing, by writing.
Yeah.
On a daily basis, I express myself in some way.
Yeah. And it's funny you referenced nursing home. The other vision that I have is, when it comes time, right, I'll probably end up in a nursing home. Right?
A lot of people do.
Right. My goal in life is to be the coolest guy in the nursing home, right? I want to have all the cool stories. I want to have photos to prove it, right? Right. That's my goal, So I got to find a nursing home where there's not as many cool people, right? So
I worked in a nursing home all through college, and I loved it. A lot of people found it very depressing.
So many stories, right?
Well, there's different
wisdom.
wings. There's the wing with the dementia wing, where they're essentially gone because their memories are gone.
Sure.
But they're still people. They're still human beings, and they're still cared for. And they're still entertaining. I loved interacting with them.
Oh, yeah.
Because you never knew what was going to come out of their mouths.
You don't.
And then there was the wing where they still fully have had their faculties, but they're physically not as strong anymore, and so they couldn't care for themselves. And I love joking around with them. I would treat them like my friends and just give them shit. And they loved it, because most people would treat them like furniture, or like they are very fragile or very cautiously. And I would just come in and make jokes.
Yeah.
And they couldn't wait for me. I was the maintenance man. Couldn't wait for me to come through and empty their basket or change the light bulb. And they would play jokes on me. There was a guy named Burger Person. And he was a old Swedish man, and I went into his room once to empty his garbage, and he said, "Hey, there's a problem with my window." I said, "Oh, what is it?" He said, "Over here, go over there and check it out." So I went over and looked at the window. It seemed fine to me. I said, "What's wrong?" "It looks fine." He said, "Feel it. Put your hand on it." So I put my hand on the window, and I said, "What?" He said, "Do you feel the problem?" I said, "No, what's wrong?" He said, "Do you feel the pain?" I said, "No, I don't feel the pain." And he's laughing. "Are you sure you don't feel the pain?" And he's laughing and laughing. "No, I don't feel the pain." And pretty soon I realized, Burger.
That's great. Yeah.
They couldn't get away with that with a lot of people, but me, I just treated them like friends.
That's the way to do it. It's funny you say that, because my son's first job, right? He was like 17 years old, and his first job was working in a nursing home, right?
Yeah.
Because my wife helped him find the job. Let's use hiring, clothes,
it's a great job.
right? And so he got a job there, and he was like, working in the dementia department as well. And he'd come home with the most interesting stories, and I think it gave him a good perspective on life, right? He's like, "Oh, there's a lady, we call her the cookie lady, because she always wants cookies, and sometimes they'll sneak and get her a cookie, and then there's this guy, Frank, and he's from New York, and he misses his wife, and he always asks me, where's whatever, Daisy, And then, and he doesn't know how to answer. He's like, "I don't know, what do you mean? And I'm like, just say she's here. She loves you, you know what I mean?" And so, just kind of giving advice on how to kind of deal with situations. But, boy, what a great first job for him to kind of do that.
Yeah,
totally
it's awesome.
great.
I highly recommend anyone work at a nursing home sometime.
Yeah.
Because you're surrounded by people, you're surrounded by centuries worth of wisdom.
Sure.
Also.
Yeah.
The same guy, Burger, who we became pals. And one day I was there on a Sunday, and the water pump broke. I don't know how to fix a water pump, but they needed water, and there was no way to get a plumber in there on that Sunday. So Burger said, "Come here, I'll talk you through it." So Burger, walked in there into this utility room with me, and he said, "Okay, take the ratchet, undo this, undo that," because we had spare parts.
Yeah.
And he talked me through putting a new water pump in.
See?
Because he knew how to do it.
He's done it, yeah.
The wisdom was there.
There is a lot of wisdom.
And they love to share it.
Yeah.
The Native Americans used to put all the old timers in charge of the very youngest people.
Sure.
And now we put them in separate houses, where it makes much more sense to combine them so they can share their wisdom, while the people who are, the middle ages are out hunting or doing what they have to do to support the tribe.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good point. All right, so we have this thing we call Hennessey Heart to Heart, where we just ask questions, simple questions, and then whatever first comes to mind, you just respond with.
Okay.
So the first question here is, what inspires you to be a better yourself?
Every time I'm terrible.
To better yourself, rather.
Every time I'm horrible. Every time I do a terrible thing or I make a huge mistake, it's like, oh, you should do so much better. Usually it's when I hurt someone emotionally or sometimes, inadvertently, and sometimes it comes naturally because I feel hurt myself. If in an argument or something. I'm constantly disappointed in myself.
Yeah.
But I'm a human being, right? And we're not perfect, and so you gotta forgive yourself and others, and just try to do better.
Yeah. Good answer. Where are you the happiest?
Away from people, out in the middle of nowhere, or maybe with one or two people.
Yeah.
Fishing in northern Canada.
Okay.
Away from the internet.
Yeah. Huh.
I'm never so joyful as when I'm out in the middle of Ontario on Lake of the Woods.
Yeah.
And there's no access to Instagram.
Got it. What book most greatly changed your perspective?
Well, for the film industry, it would probably be What Makes Sammy Run.
Okay.
Bud Schulberg wrote this book in the 40s, and it's about the inner workings of Hollywood, and it's still accurate. It's anyone who is contemplating the film business or in the film business should read What Makes Sammy Run.
Okay.
That inspired me. What inspired me probably in the direction I went to make The Nature of Existence and a lot of the concept documentaries was a book by Carl Sagan called The Demon Haunted World.
Okay.
Where Carl Sagan essentially debunked everything. From demons to witches to aliens, you name it. He explains why people have believed these things, the origins of these mythologies.
I'll have to check that book out. If you could eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Thai food.
Thai food?
For sure.
Okay.
You knew I was going to say that. Yeah, I love Thai food. Plus, any East Asian, Southeast Asian food.
Got it. Most people, I think, their go-to is like Italian, right? Yeah. I love Thai food, though.
I mean, I love food in general.
Yeah.
What I don't like, though, I guess is what I grew up with, which is that Midwestern wheat-based beef cultural style of food.
Sure.
I've evolved out of that and into much more of a world flavors.
Okay. Yeah. I discovered Indian food for the first time in my life when I was like 35 years old. I'm like, how have I been missing this my whole life, right? Yeah.
You got to try new things and try new foods. And I never had sushi before I moved to Los Angeles. And I got here. I was working for the company I made Trekkies with, and I wanted to make my next film. And so I went to lunch with a producer who had seen Trekkies, and he was considering helping me finance my next film, 6 Days in Roswell, about UFO fanatics and suckers, my car salesman comedy. And so I had to be very respectful, because I wanted him to put up the cash. Yeah. He invited me to lunch at a sushi restaurant. I had never been before. So I met him there, and he said, let's sit here. We sat at the counter with the chefs in front of us, and he said, I'll order. He's Japanese, so he knows what to order better than I do. I don't know a thing. So he just says to the sushi chef, just bring us whatever's fresh. So they started putting things down in front of us. Eggs, fish eggs, and mackerel and yellowtail. And I'd never put anything like that in my mouth before. And where I grew up in Minnesota, you never eat raw fish.
Sure.
It's not done. You cook fish because you'll get parasites or, it's dangerous. Whatever. But I wanted his cash, so I put whatever they put in front of me, I put it in my mouth. And it was so delicious.
See?
I was converted. I've been loving and eating sushi ever since.
Interesting.
Because I was forced out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
By other needs.
See, me, I don't explore much with food, like that kind of stuff. Like, I'll try things, but like I'm picky eater, and I think it's all in my mind. You know what I mean? That's where it all begins. So I got to convince myself that it's okay to do that. Yeah.
That's the best thing about having a girlfriend. She forces you to improve your music collection and your tastes, and your things you try, or just meeting a new friend in general.
Sure. Yeah.
They bring a different experience into your life, and you
Accept
force you
it.
to try things.
Sometimes accept it. What part of adulthood do you dread?
I hate doing my taxes.
Okay.
I hate numbers. I hate busy work. It has to be done, but when that time of the year comes, it's just drudgery.
Okay.
I hate following the stock market. I hate just watching numbers go up and down. I have no control over the numbers, and so it's just like I don't like gambling because I don't like losing.
Yeah.
I guess it's a loss of control.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I hate loss of control, and it's like ending up in the nursing home. You don't want to end up in a nursing home with having lost control of your life.
Sure. Yeah.
That's my biggest fear.
Yeah, interesting.
I hated renting an apartment because I was under the control of a landlord, right? So I ended up buying my own place eventually, and I was still under the control of a bank, it turned out. So until you're completely financially set, you're always under somebody's control, but I try to lessen it as much as I can so that I can make the choices in my life that I want to make without being subjected to others' needs or choices.
Got it. Is failing less than, equal to, or more important than succeeding?
Well, they go together, right? I mean, you can't... Failure teaches you how to succeed. I think it's good to be a loser in high school.
That's a quote.
If you're a big success in high school, you don't learn the skills for dealing with all the failures and rejections that are going to come after high school.
Yep, I can see that being a weakness. Yeah, for sure. Yep. In hindsight. Have you ever had a nickname?
Oh, boy. My name is Roger, and so the nickname I've often given myself is Raja.
Raja.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I was shooting a pilot for TNT about this Renaissance bar, one of the main people it was in the group, he started calling me Blade.
Okay.
Because I was so incisive, I guess, and okay, we're doing this next. I got it. Next, we're going on to do this. Now we're going to do this.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this guy cuts right through everything.
How do you handle high stress situations?
The film industry is one high stress situation after another when you're on a production.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be able to withstand it. And part of being a loser when you're young, it helps you build a strong enough shell so that you have the strength to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was filming my second movie, it was an action film called American Yakuza 2. It was so stressful because there were far more people involved above me. The higher the budget gets, the more stress there is because there's more cooks and more people you have to satisfy, and you can't satisfy them all. And I felt like some days it was a complete disaster, what we shot the day before. But I had to put forth a face to the crew that everything's going great.
Yeah.
You don't want them to ever get a whiff of desperation.
That you're stressed.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to be stressed, but you have to, if you're a leader, you have to manage it somehow. For me, it was jogging or hiking and physical activity.
Yeah.
And I still hike every week, and that's how I stayed alive, is through hiking.
Nice. What's one thing that would make the world a happier place?
If well, first of all, there's way too many people.
Yeah.
We're using up our resources. Overpopulation is the number one problem, which is leading to, we're in the middle of the 6th great extinction. There have been 5 great extinctions in the history of the planet. We are causing the 5th great extinction. And why is that? Because we're programmed for selfishness. So what can we do about it? A little bit of selflessness goes a long way. One of the 5 love languages is service,
Yeah.
right?
Acts of
Service for others.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we can do that for other people, the better our world becomes.
Totally agree. Yep. I think about that a lot. What is your greatest fear as an adult?
I had a lot more fears when I was younger than I do now.
Yeah.
But my greatest fear is that I will run out of ideas. Maybe because that's what I do, is I come up with ideas and I develop them. Some blossom and some wither, but that my creativity will go away, I guess. I mean, yeah, I'm afraid of dying too. I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Who does? Because I'm having fun. Life gets better and better. Every year it gets better. Even when it gets worse, it's getting better because you're still here and I'm still experiencing the bad stuff.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think my greatest fear is losing my mind.
Right. Well, if you get dementia, right, and you lose your memories, you're gone. Who are you? Anymore?
Now you're more of a burden on people, in some sense, right? But you don't even remember who you are, right? But people still love you.
There are little moments when that happens, though. Imagine, like, when you get really angry, you behave differently when you're in a rage than when you do when you're more in control.
Sure.
That's not the same you. It's a different you. You've lost control of who you are. And so we all have to learn to get along with each other, to control our anger and not be hurtful, which is not easy. It's hard.
Yeah, it is. So you've done a documentary on this, but according to you, what is the most important thing in a relationship?
Well, yeah, the documentary is The Truth About Marriage, and the book, The Truth About Marriage. If I had to boil it down to the one thing I learned after I spent 7 years traveling around finding relationship experts and interrogating them about why are relationships so hard for people? If 50% of relationships are ending in divorce, there's something wrong with this plan.
Sure.
And so what is it? And well, first of all, the problem was that we have expectations that are out of sync with who we are as a species. Our culture, our society gives us expectations for how we should behave. You should get married by a certain date. You should have X number of children. You should do this. You should do that. All these shoulds, which may not align with what you're feeling you want to do. And that creates anxiety and then anger and then arguments. But knowing, look, we live in the society we live in, so that's not going to change.
Sure.
It's a monogamous culture, and we have to live within it. No matter what you feel, we want to fit within this culture in some way. I mean, there are polygamists. You can find your groups, whether it's polygamy maybe or a gay community or lesbian community or whatever it is that's within you. You can find that group somewhere. But we have a culture overall that we all want to fit within. And the thing I learned, if I was going to boil it down, if you want to have a happier relationship, whatever relationship you're in, if you're married, if you've got a boyfriend, girlfriend, gay or straight, the number one thing you can do is check in with your partner emotionally daily. And we don't do that because we come home and we turn on the TV and we don't look at each other. We look past each other. We look sideways. We watch TV. And the way to fix this, to fix your relationship, to give your relationship a chance to be fixed is, and I'm going to speak first to the masculine side of the brain. We all have both masculine and feminine. We all have more of one than the other, and we typically end up with a person who has the opposite that we have. If you're the more masculine person in the relationship, go home. Try this experiment for a week. You got nothing to lose. It costs you nothing. Go home, put your iPhone on airplane mode, turn off the TV and the computer, make eye contact with your spouse and say, honey, how was your day? Or, honey, how are you feeling? And then shut up.
Yeah.
The instinct for the masculine is to try to fix things or offer solutions or ask, let's say your wife or girlfriend says, oh, my boss, he was so mean or he was so terrible today. And your instinct is to say, oh, you should quit that job. I don't know why you stay there, which makes her feel like she's made a mistake or makes her feel worse.
Sure.
When you should just say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. express empathy.
Yeah.
How was your day? And then express empathy. Nothing else. And what does it mean to express empathy? It's to show that you understand how they're feeling by simply saying, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
And obviously being authentic, right? Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
Not a requirement, but it helps. If a lot of men have compartmentalized and are able to continue thinking about the game while they're sitting there making eye contact and doing because it's really, the feminine partner just needs to express and download emotionally the events of the day.
Yeah.
Have someone who will just listen.
That's right.
It's for about 10 to 20 minutes per day. It's like this emotional vitamin that the feminine part of the brain needs. Yeah. We all need it to some degree, but the feminine partner needs it the most.
Sure.
So if your sex life isn't going where you like, or you're arguing a lot, or you're not connecting, just try this experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guarantee after a week or so, things are going to get so much better because now that person is getting the vitamin that they weren't getting, and we're feeling anxious and then unhappy and then arguments. And
it's building up, right? You have to breathe out.
Yes.
Right? And you're just the way that get them to breathe out. Yeah.
That's the most important thing that the masculine can do. And then there's a counterpoint I should add, though, for what the feminine should do for the masculine person in the relationship. The masculine side of the brain, and we all have it, like I said, some more than others, have one more than the other, is the masculine needs to disconnect occasionally. We all want to connect. We all want to connect. We want to be together, right? But once the masculine connects, there's the countervailing instinct is to disconnect. I want freedom.
Sure.
Now I need freedom.
Yeah.
And so the masculine person connects and then goes through this orbit of connection and disconnection.
Yeah.
The more you try to get in the way of that, the more it causes frustration and anger and arguments. And that's one reason that there's like the Elks Club or going fishing, going golfing. Honey, I'm going golfing.
Yeah.
Right? Just going to the cave. John Gray calls it going to the cave.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way, though, to disconnect. And according to the experts, the best way is to announce your disconnection. Honey, I'm going golfing with my friends. Now you've announced. And so she knows, oh, he's disconnecting. Mm-hmm. No need to be insecure about it.
Sure.
It's expected. It's normal. It happens once a week. But when you announce the disconnection, also announce when you're going to reconnect.
Yeah.
Honey, I'm going golfing with so-and-so, with Timmy and John, and I can't wait to see you for dinner at 7 o'clock.
There you go.
So now she knows when you're going to reconnect, and it's crucial, though, if you say 7 o'clock, that you are home at 7 o'clock, or call. Because your word is important. Your reputation is all tied up into this.
That's
but
great advice.
The feminine should not ask for, don't get greedy. Like, don't ask for more than 20 minutes of relationship talk. Mm-hmm. Because the masculine brain side of the brain, it floods. It's what Dr. Gottman calls flooding. The masculine brain can only handle about 20 minutes before it overwhelms and starts getting frustrated and then angry.
Interesting.
So limit yourself to those 20 minutes, and it's best to make an appointment. If you want to argue about something, or if there's a disagreement, argue by appointment.
Got it.
Honey, I'd like to talk to you about the garage, because it's a big mess, right?
Mm-hmm.
When is a good time that would be convenient for you? As opposed to, honey, the garage is a mess and you're a slob. That gets you nowhere. But if you set a time, an appointment, the masculine side of the brain has time to adjust. They don't like ambush discussions.
Like it, yeah.
So those are some of the most important things I learned. I learned many, many things about relationships that I had no clue about. But those, if I had to boil it down, those are some of the top pieces of information or advice I learned.
Good advice. And then I'll end with this. What is something you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Oh, boy, can you imagine going back as a kid if you knew everything?
Could you imagine?
So many things I do differently.
Yeah.
But then I wouldn't have become the person I am today.
That's right. Yeah.
You need to suffer a little bit. You need to make mistakes and trip and fall.
Yeah.
My parents used to say, go out, get out of the house, and don't come back until it's dinner time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would go out and we'd step on rusty nails and fall out of tree forts and fall in the lake. And I mean, it sounds like bad parenting.
Yeah.
But it taught us how to survive life because the world isn't full of pillows and soft corners.
No.
You can't protect a child from the future. The best way you can protect a child from the future is to let them
experience life,
have troubles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
totally agree.
I mean, if I went back in time, I wish I knew what the stock market was going to do.
Right? Yeah. What's this Bitcoin thing?
Yeah. Get by Apple.
I think I would probably go back in time and tell myself, my younger self, that, hey, there's this thing called energy, right? And there's negative energy and positive energy, and always try to, and it's both contagious, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of always try to carry positive energy. I think I just did that mostly naturally, but, when you think that, I think it's powerful.
Well, something drove you to where you are today.
Yeah.
How did you get there, right? Just power of positive thinking?
That's right. Yeah. Abundance mindset, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And not really coming from much, right? That's a big part.
That's a good motivator.
Yeah. You can take risk, and if you end up failing, it's okay, because I've been at the bottom before, right? So I know what that looks like. Well, Roger, this has been awesome. I appreciate you coming in. I know that you're a man that values your time. You're very efficient.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me come in and blather on.
Yeah, and so for those that want to maybe follow you or buy your books or follow some new documentaries that you're working on, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, check out all my documentaries and my books. RogerNygard.com will lead you to everything, but the books and the documentaries are on Amazon.
Great.
The Truth About Marriage, The Nature of Existence, my film about car salesmen, Suckers.
Cool.
And Trekkies is coming out again. Trekkies 2 is currently out. The 6 Days in Roswell is also on Amazon. And watch for the new book about making documentaries in the coming year or so.
Awesome. Well, when you start to create that documentary, let me know. I'd love to come, maybe witness it,
Oh,
Yeah.
that would be great. Yeah.
For sure.
You got a date.
All right, let's do it. Thank you again.
You're welcome.